My name is Bibi Ashraf. I'm representing the United Nations Association of Singapore and the University of London because I just graduated. And over to you.
My name is Jonathan. I just graduated from NUS and currently taking up gap year.
Hi, my name is Claire Ariella. I'm in the food manufacturing and services sector, and I'm very passionate of food waste, and that's why I'm here.
Hello, my name is Tobias. I'm a student from NUS, and that's about it.
Hi, my name is Jie Hui, and I'm with Forum for the Future, a sustainability NGO. But I'm also here to speak on behalf of myself as a Singaporean. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Melissa Loh. I'm an energy analyst with the Energy Studies Institute at the National University of Singapore.
Okay, Melissa, let's start with you, assuming you've got the microphone.
All right,
Tell us
fantastic.
about energy.
Okay, so Jie Hui and I will be presenting the case for energy in Singapore. We've discussed that there are some major challenges for energy here in Singapore. Primarily is that we use 100% fossil fuels for power generation, but as some of you will know, 80% of which comes from natural gas. That's good news because it's the most benign of the fossil fuels in terms of carbon emissions. But one thing that I would like to note as well is that in terms of refineries in Singapore, Tuas Power has set up a coal biomass plant, and that's not being counted into our business as usual targets, as far as I'm aware. So that might be an issue for Singapore in terms of meeting its 16% below business as usual by 2020 target. For electric vehicles, some of you may be aware that Singapore is conducting a test bid for electric vehicles, but it's still using fossil fuels to power them. So that's going to be a challenge moving forward. Coming to renewable energy, some of you may have attended the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore white paper launch on Friday last week. They had launched a white paper saying that renewable energy is in fact viable in Singapore. Based on that report, I can safely tell you that PV and bioenergy are already viable here in Singapore. The levelized cost of electricity based on generated from those renewable sources are below the retail tariff rates. So the challenge really is to perhaps redesign the way that electricity market is structured and to increase the number of contestable consumers. So right now I'm going to pass it on to Jie Hui to discuss the solutions that we talked about.
Well done, you've taken over as the chair as well. Exceptional.
Hi, so some of the solutions that we discussed in terms of what you can do in the short term, I think in the energy industry, everybody knows that energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit. You can do it in two ways. You can legislate. So I think Singapore is starting to do something around this. There was an Energy Conservation Act passed earlier this year, and I think over 100 companies of the largest energy users in Singapore will have to submit their energy use reports, as well as an energy efficiency plan by the mid of next year, which I think will give us a good idea on how we can actually benchmark and get other companies to do the same. But for me, as just a Singaporean who grew up in this country, I feel like we have to take a step back and think about do people even know what the source of energy is in Singapore? If you go on the street, talk to a Singaporean, everyone is quite well aware of our water sources. We know that it comes from our reservoirs, we have new water, we have imported water, and then we're doing desalination, and we're going to be quite water secure. So this is well drilled into the heads of the public here, but nobody really knows about the same for energy. And I feel that to have the public conversation around this will be very helpful in terms of getting energy efficiency practices adopted, as well as having youth of today and leaders of tomorrow really pushing for better energy policies in the long run. So I guess our solution to it is to start including it in the curriculums, not just at the tertiary level, but even back into like your primary school textbooks, my social study text in the secondary school environment. So education, we feel, can start from an early age. That's what we have to say for energy.
So our group discussed consumer products and sustainability of consumer products. And we think that the most important aspect when talking about this is that we are talking about that life cycle of objects. From the creation through the use to the disposal of something, we have to consider that closed circle approach. Claire will go a little bit into detail about how that looks into a specific industry, consumer industry, which is food and packaging.
So we talked about two types of waste, inorganic as well as organic waste. So packaging and food was what we specifically talked about. So for packaging waste, a lot of what we talked about was about having partnerships and changing the mindsets of people, which come with education. So in the packaging, for example, when you go shopping in a supermarket, most people don't really know after I throw the bag in the bin where it goes. So what we talked about was have education for people to know where, what sort of waste is being discarded, as well as because we have bags, or even if you go to food courts, you can buy at little or no cost at all for some packaging. So to increase the cost of packaging to consumers. And perhaps for businesses to factor the environmental cost of the product into their prices. Other things we talked about for packaging was having chains, maybe supermarket chains, to come together and set a fair price together for consumers and have a similar message across the board, so that consumers, so it's like fair play, but it's a collaborative effort in terms of packaging. For food waste, we talked about how we can work into the architecture. Like, I'm in food manufacturing, so I know what the building looks like. We have clusters of food places. But if there were a system not just in our food factories, or even in the HDB flats or the flatted, residential flats, where there already is built in a system where food or all the waste is sorted, it will kind of give people an idea that, I'm supposed to sort my waste. Because right now, in most buildings, the current ones that I live in at least, everything is thrown into one place, into one chute, or into one, so people don't really sort. And also to have a system of incentives for people. So, for example, in food waste could be turned into water or compost. So to have water maybe churned back into the business as an incentive to decrease our water costs, and which will eventually lower waste disposal and utility bills and things like that. That's it.
So it's a little conclusion. Whether you are in food industry, where you have those short life cycle connected circles, or in other industries where you're trying to expand the circle and increase the lifespan of products, we think it's of value to have that idea of a circle in mind. And as an enterprise, we would ask ourselves the question, do you have a circle? And if yes, how well is it managed, and how well can you motivate your team to improve on that? Thank you.
Hi, I'm representing my group that is actually discussing on agriculture and forestry. During our discussion, many stuff were being brought up, but one main issue that actually keeps being brought up is a competition. As in, there's competition in the usage of land. As we understand, spaces are used for various things, such as energy plants, residential places. The second point that most of us brought up, something that is more dear to us, which we realize that, as we go on as consumers itself, there's a discourse between what we actually eat and knowing where they come from. Just take today's lunch, for example. How many of you can actually identify all the vegetables that is actually used in the dish? What is the growing process that has been brought through when producing this food? Are they genetically modified? Are things put in there that may cause detrimental health in the long run? These are things which I think as we grow up, consumers are not educated, or rather consumers are not being shown what these things are. So given these two problems, the usage, the problem of usage or the availability of land in urban areas, and the discourse of transparency in terms of our food itself, what we have came up with is actually the proposal of having microsites for farmers. farming. So for example, in the Marina Bay area, for example, we could grow our vegetables, not say all types of vegetable, but many tropical vegetables in buildings itself or on top of buildings. And all this food can actually be supplied straight to the F&Bs right here in Marina Bay. So when we talk about, the global supply chain of food in the import and export industry itself, by being able to grow in the district site itself, we're actually cutting down on the carbon footprint in that way. As a parting note, we must also remember that as we share the same, as we live on this earth itself, as much as we are competing with each other to see how much resources we can get and how much land we can use for the own development that we are actually imagining or visioning ourselves towards, we are also sharing the same habitat with other species that do not speak the same language as us. I'm talking about our rainforests, our nature sites itself. A lot of times when we destroy things, we make our buildings green, but we have not considered as much as possible. We have been talking about carbon footprint, but how about the biodiversity in the place itself? We have not seen buildings, as much as we clear an area, there are certain ecosystems of natural habitats of like insects or birds itself that actually lose and are not given a voice in that sense. So, as we go into develop itself, let us take in mind that, we are not sharing the space that's Homo sapiens itself, we're also sharing with species that do not speak the same language and would need our firm stand in protecting them. Thank you.
Well said.
Hi, my name is Baby. I'll be speaking on sustainable cities. Now, the team came up with an interesting analysis of what a city really is. So often when you think about sustainable and cities, it looks like a juxtaposition of words next to each other because how can a city be sustainable? So we've broken down a city into different layers, looking at it from the perspective that a city is made up of different layers, and all these layers make up a system. One of our key findings is basically a trade-off needs to be established between resource consumption as well as resource use and consumption. So these two are more often than not at conflict. It's almost like, if you think about it graphically, you have many constraints and you have a little feasible region to operate within. So that's pretty much sustainable, the outlook of sustainability in cities. Some of the key challenges that we think are surfacing and will continue to surface unless something is done about it is firstly, the accountability of social and environmental externalities. This can be looked at from different perspectives. You can look at it from a cost point of view, who's going to incur the cost, who's going to pay the extra taxes, and whether governments are willing or able to give out subsidies. Another one would probably be about, on a more serious note, it would be really, truly operationalizing the frameworks, the policies, and the funds that we have. So if you inject, for example, $2 million into an economy, is that money going to trickle down to the layers of the system, bearing in mind that people and citizens of a city are the key constituents of a city and a country? Pretty much that's about it. On a conclusive note, we would like to highlight a vicious cycle made up of 3 points. Firstly, we have the depletion of natural resources taking place. Moving forward to economic growth, when resources get depleted, they become scarce. You start having a supply side problem. Prices start to escalate because these things are now more precious than before. Yes, it contributes to economic growth indirectly, but on the other hand, you need more capital, more investments to buffer this rising costs. And how are you going to do that? So that is at loggerheads with research and investing in technology that will help sustainability. And those are the key areas we certainly hope will be looked into. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed.